He paid just $1 for a forgotten cabin by a quiet Colorado lake, broken, frozen, and left to rot. 3 years after losing his wife, Michael Harris, a grieving realtor trying to start over, thought he was only buying silence. But on his way there, he rescued a wounded German shepherd, a lost police dog, and beneath the cabin's floorboards, he found a rusted tin box and a trail of secrets buried deep in the snow. What began as a lonely man's attempt to heal became a story of loyalty, redemption, and love, proof that sometimes the door we open for others is the one that saves us. Before we begin, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel, leave a like, and may God bless everyone watching. The wind swept over Lake Arrow, sharp and whispering, bending the pines that stood like sentinels around the frozen water. The air smelled of cedar and distance, the kind of stillness that could either heal a man or swallow him whole. Michael Harris gripped at the steering wheel of his aging Ford, the heater groaning in protest. At 60, his face carried the quiet fatigue of someone who'd spent a lifetime convincing others of second chances, in homes, in hope, in fresh paint and mortgage rates, but never quite found one for himself. His hair was steel gray now, and his beard, trimmed but uneven, framed a mouth more familiar with silence than laughter. Once, before grief rearranged his life, he'd been the man who left the porch light on for strangers. But when his wife Claire died 3 winters ago, a heart attack sudden as thunder, he'd shut every light off inside himself. Selling houses felt hollow when the only home that had mattered was buried with her in the ground. The county auction notice had been a joke at first. $1 property, abandoned lakeside lodge, needs repairs. But something about the absurd price tugged at him, the promise of starting again somewhere no one knew his story. Maybe the house was broken enough to match him. The tires skidded slightly on the frozen dirt. As he neared the turnoff, a flash of movement caught his eye. A shape in the snow, low and trembling. He slowed, frowning, and stepped out. The wind cut against his coat as he trudged closer. It was a German shepherd, fur black and tan but dulled by dirt, one ear torn clean through. The animal was caught in an old steel trap, its hind leg clamped cruelly between the jaws of rusted metal. Blood had frozen around the wound, staining the snow crimson. Michael's instincts, shaped by years of soft-selling sympathy, took over. He spoke softly, voice steady. "Easy there, boy. I'm not here to hurt you." The dog's eyes lifted, amber, sharp, assessing. No fear, only a soldier's mistrust. He used a wrench from the truck to pry the trap open, his hands shaking from cold and adrenaline. When the spring released, the shepherd limped free, favoring the leg but refusing to run. Instead, it stood there, ribs heaving, then followed him back to the truck, as if the choice had already been made. Michael chuckled, half to himself. "You're stubborn. Guess that makes 2 of us." At the edge of town, he stopped at the only shop still lit, Brooks Books, a crooked little bookstore with a bell above the door that jingled like an afterthought. Inside, the smell of paper and cinnamon hung thick in the air. Behind the counter stood Maggie Brooks, a woman in her late 50s with chestnut hair streaked in silver, tied in a loose braid that slipped over her shoulder. Her eyes were green, curious, and a little mischievous, the kind of eyes that looked like they had stories to trade. Her build was slim, graceful in a way that came from moving through life at her own deliberate pace. "Well," she said, wiping her hands on a rag, "that's not something I see every day. A realtor and a half-frozen dog." Michael gave a small smile, found him caught in a trap, thought he might need a little first aid. She disappeared behind the counter and returned with a small tin of antiseptic and gauze. "Here," she said, kneeling by the dog. "He's got the kind of eyes that remember too much. You planning to keep him?" He hesitated. "Not sure. I barely keep myself together." Maggie smiled, a slow, knowing curve of the lips. "Then maybe he'll help with that. First tenants in a $1 house should at least bark, don't you think?" Her words made him laugh, a sound he hadn't heard from his own chest in months. He thanked her and drove on toward the lodge, her smile somehow lingering in the reflection of the rearview mirror longer than seemed possible. The road wound through evergreens until the lodge appeared, slumped against the shore like an old man too tired to stand. Its shingles curled with age, and one shutter flapped weakly in the wind. Snow gathered on the sagging porch. Still, there was something noble about it, a structure that refused to die quietly. Inside, the air was thick with dust and cold earth. The wood floors creaked under his boots, each step sounding like memory. Ranger, that's what he decided to call the dog, limped after him, nose twitching, tail low but steady. "Guess this is home now," Michael said softly, "for both of us." He set up a fire in the cracked stone hearth, fed the dog water, then sat in the glow, trying not to think about how strange it felt to share space with another heartbeat again. Ranger watched him constantly, as if studying his soul. When Michael finally turned down the lantern, the silence settled thick as the snow outside. He had almost drifted into uneasy sleep when a sound broke through, a soft scratch against wood. He opened his eyes. Ranger stood at the corner of the room, pawing insistently at one warped plank in the floor. Michael frowned. "What is it, boy?" The dog whined, pawing harder. Michael knelt, fingers brushing dust and splinters. The board shifted under pressure. Beneath it, darkness and the faint glint of metal. He lifted it carefully. Inside lay a small tin box, rusted and cold. Beside it, streaks of dried mud mixed with shards of broken glass. When he pried open the lid, a bundle of old keys fell out, along with a metal tag etched with a code, K9 to 47C. Ranger let out a low, trembling sound. Not fear, not anger, but something closer to recognition. Michael looked from the tag to the dog. What the hell did we just find? Outside, the wind shifted, and for just a second, he thought he heard a distant echo. Not of the storm, but of a whistle. Only the dog seemed to understand. The morning broke thin and cold, the kind of light that turned the snow into mirrors. Michael Harris stirred from a shallow sleep, his back stiff from the old couch and his mind still orbiting the memory of the tin box. Ranger lay near the hearth, his amber eyes open, ears twitching to the distant creak of ice on the lake. The night's discovery had lodged itself in Michael's thoughts like a splinter, a canine tag, a set of keys, and a dog who seemed to remember something he couldn't explain. By mid-morning, he drove Ranger into town, the truck engine groaning like an old animal reluctant to wake. The veterinary clinic sat at the edge of Main Street, its paint faded, the sign tilting under the weight of years. Inside, the smell of antiseptic mixed with hay and winter. A woman emerged from the back room, Dr. Evelyn Clark, tall and willowy, perhaps in her late 40s. Her hair was a deep chestnut pulled into a low bun, and her sharp blue eyes had the calm precision of someone who'd long since learned to keep her emotions steady. A faint scar traced her left jawline, a mark that hinted at a life that hadn't been all clinic hours and routine checkups. "Let's have a look at this handsome fellow," she said softly, crouching as Ranger sniffed her hand. Her tone was practical but kind, a voice built for easing the panic out of both animals and humans. "You've been through something, haven't you?" Michael explained how he had found the shepherd in the trap and, almost reluctantly, mentioned the tag from the box. Evelyn lifted Ranger's ear and frowned. "There it is," she murmured. "Tattoo code, K947C. That's an old federal system, used for rescue and search units until about 15 years ago. This dog was trained, probably part of a SAR team. But that number's been retired for a long time." Michael felt a ripple of unease. Retired how? Usually means the unit was dissolved or lost. She hesitated, then straightened. "If I had to guess, this one's seen more than just the inside of a backyard." On the way out, she scribbled something on a card, an address for an animal registry in Denver. "If you really want to know who he was, they'll have records. But sometimes, Mr. Harris, not knowing is easier." Michael smiled faintly. "Easier doesn't always help you sleep." He returned to the lodge, the wind sharpening around the lake. Ranger lay curled on the passenger seat, one paw over his muzzle. On the seat beside him, the leather notebook from the tin box sat waiting. Its cover was cracked, corners gnawed by time. Michael had resisted opening it the night before, partly from fear, partly from the feeling that it wasn't his to touch. But as he sat at the old table under the cabin's dusty window, he unbuckled the strap and turned the first page. Inside were maps of the surrounding forest, drawn by hand in fading ink. Red markings dotted certain ridges near the lake, circles linked by arrows. Beside them were neat rows of notes: payment to OP, drain route secured, inspection delayed. At the back, tucked into a flap, was a folded letter, brittle, written in looping script. "OP demands quiet handling of the Lower Ridge project, no public notice, must finish before thaw. GC." He didn't know who GC was, but the initials OP gnawed at him. The handwriting, the urgency. This wasn't about land surveys. This was about secrets buried under ice and soil. That evening, he stopped by Maggie Brooks's bookstore again. She looked up from a stack of old novels, adjusting her glasses. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she teased, but her tone softened when she saw his expression. "I might have read one," he said, placing the notebook on the counter. As she turned the pages, her brows knitted. "O.P.," she said slowly. "That would be Owen Price. Used to run construction around here, the kind of man who shakes your hand with one and steals your wallet with the other." She leaned back, eyes clouding. There was a flood 5 years ago, after he built an illegal dam near the North Campgrounds. Mudslide wiped out the trail. People protested, but nothing stuck. He vanished after that storm. Michael frowned. "What about the K-9? You ever hear of one missing?" She nodded, hesitating. During that same storm, a handler and his rescue dog went missing during the evacuation. Never found. Some said the man tried to warn people about the dam before it collapsed. She closed the notebook carefully. "You think your ranger is that dog?" "I don't know," Michael murmured, "but he led me straight to this." Outside, dusk settled like breath against glass. Maggie stood at the doorway as he left, her face half lit by the shop's yellow glow. "Be careful, Michael," she said softly. "Owen Price built more than dams. He built fear." The drive back to the lodge was slow, snow thickening again. The world felt quieter, too quiet, as if holding its breath. Michael parked, carried the notebook inside, and dropped it on the table. Ranger paced near the door, uneasy, ears pricking toward the dark beyond the porch. Then came the faint scrape, the same sound he'd heard the night before, only this time from outside. He froze, listening. Footsteps, light but deliberate. A shadow crossed the frosted window pane, tall and still. Ranger's growl rumbled low, deep enough to vibrate through the floorboards. Michael reached for the fire poker, stepping slowly toward the door. The smell of cold smoke drifted through the cracks. And then a new scent, sharper, human. Tobacco, stale, and familiar. He flicked the latch open, ready to confront whoever was there. No one, only the wind. But when he looked down, he saw something slid beneath the door. A single folded note, edges damp from snow. His hand trembled slightly as he opened it. The handwriting was rough, the ink smudged. "Don't touch what isn't yours." Ranger barked once, sharp and guttural, his fur bristling. Michael stared into the black line of the forest, a chill crawling through his chest. Somewhere beyond the pines, something, or someone, was watching. The storm arrived without warning. One moment, the world outside the lodge was still, wrapped in gray quiet. The next, the wind howled like a wounded animal. Snow fell thick and fast, swallowing the outline of the lake, the trees, and finally the narrow road leading back to town. Michael Harris stood at the frosted window, his breath fogging the glass as he realized they were completely cut off. The radio hissed static, the phone had lost its signal, and the only living souls within miles were himself, Maggie Brooks, and the shepherd, who now dozed near the hearth, one paw twitching as if chasing ghosts in his dreams. Maggie was the first to speak. "Well," she said, tugging her scarf tighter around her neck, "we're officially trapped. How's your survival cooking, Mr. Realtor?" Her voice carried a calm humor, but her eyes, hazel flecked with green, betrayed a flicker of unease. Michael chuckled, rubbing his palms together. "Depends. You like your potatoes rustic or half-burned?" The lodge groaned as the wind slammed against it, snow piling up against the windows. In the dim kitchen, the fire's glow painted everything in amber tones. Pots, wood beams, and the lines on Michael's face that deepened when he smiled. He looked older than 60 in the flickering light, but steadier too, the kind of man who didn't break easily even when the world turned cruel. Together they rummaged through the shelves and managed to scrape together potatoes, dried herbs, and a half-empty jar of salt. Maggie handled the knife with the ease of someone who had cooked for others once, long ago. As the soup simmered, its smell filling the cramped space, conversation came easier. She told him about her youth in Lake Arrow, back when the town had more miners than tourists, when summers smelled of pine sap and cheap gasoline. "My brother Mark," she said, her voice softening, "was always chasing danger. He built dams out of sticks, tried to trap fish with his bare hands. When Owen Price came offering him work, he thought it was his chance to matter. Then came the flood. He left that night and never came back." Michael listened quietly, hands wrapped around his mug. He thought of all the homes he'd sold, each one promising peace to someone else, while his own heart stayed locked away. "You ever think he might have been trying to protect someone?" he asked. Her lips parted, as if to speak, but Ranger suddenly stirred. His head snapped toward the stone hearth, ears erect. He let out a low growl and began to paw at the wall beside the fire. "What is it, boy?" Michael set his mug down and crouched beside him. The shepherd clawed again, sending flakes of old mortar to the floor. Michael ran his fingers along the wall and felt something hollow beneath the brick. Without hesitation, he fetched a screwdriver from his toolbox and began to pry loose the cracked starzurns. Behind them lay a dark cavity filled with soot and dust. From inside, he pulled a small, rusted handheld radio, the kind used by rescue teams years ago. Its metal was dented, the antenna snapped in two. Wrapped around it was a piece of torn fabric, stiff with dried mud and faintly stained. When he unfolded it, both he and Maggie froze. Embroidered in the corner, uneven but unmistakable, was a single-stitched letter, M. Maggie's hand went to her mouth. "That's Mark's," she whispered. "He used to mark his clothes when we were kids. Said he didn't trust the laundry." She let out a shaky laugh, but her eyes glistened. Michael studied the radio. The battery compartment had been pried open and jammed with something. An old photograph, half ruined by time. He held it close to the firelight. It showed a group of men in safety gear beside a dam wall. One of them, barely visible, wore a patch on his jacket. OP Construction. Another, kneeling beside a German shepherd, looked strikingly like a younger version of Maggie's brother. "This doesn't feel like an accident," Michael muttered. She nodded, her voice trembling. If Mark found out what Owen was doing, maybe they silenced him. The words hung between them, heavy as the snow outside. The fire popped, a single ember flaring and dying. Michael sat back, thoughts racing. He had spent decades negotiating contracts, inspecting houses, and reading the fine print that people often ignored. But this was corruption buried under land and lies. "If we go to the police, we'll need proof, real proof." Maggie met his gaze. "Then we find it." For the first time in years, something alive flickered behind his eyes. Purpose, maybe even courage. Ranger leaned his head against his leg, as if sealing the promise. Hours passed. The storm thickened. They shared the last of the soup, laughing at their own misfortune. Two middle-aged strangers caught in a snowstorm, guarded by a dog with better instincts than either of them. At one point, Maggie brushed flour from his shoulder, and for a brief second, their hands lingered. The contact startled them both. The moment passed, but not without leaving something warm behind. Later, the wind began to ease, turning into a whisper instead of a scream. The silence felt too sudden, too deliberate. Michael stood to check the window just as a sharp crack split the air, a sound not of breaking ice, but of gunfire. The glass beside him shattered, scattering shards across the floor. "Get down!" he shouted, grabbing Maggie and pulling her to the ground. The bullet had embedded itself in the wooden frame inches from where she'd been standing. Ranger barked furiously, bolting toward the door. Michael crawled to the window, peering through the broken pane. Outside, all he could see was a blur of white and shadow, a shape disappearing into the tree line. His pulse hammered in his ears. Whoever had left that warning note had just raised the stakes. Maggie clutched his arm, her face pale but steady. "They know we found something," she said. He nodded, heart pounding. "Then we'd better find the rest before they do." Outside, the snow fell again, quiet now, deceitfully calm, covering the footprints that led back into the woods. The morning after the shooting broke clear and bitter, the air so sharp it burned Michael's lungs as he stepped outside the lodge. Snow had stopped falling, but the silence it left behind was unnatural, too clean, as though the world had been freshly erased. Ranger prowled along the porch, nose low, every muscle alert. Tracks led away from the shattered window toward the tree line, only to vanish where the wind had swept the snow smooth. Whoever had fired that shot had known exactly what they were doing. Inside, Maggie sat at the table, a blanket over her shoulders, a mug of coffee untouched before her. The color hadn't quite returned to her cheeks, though her eyes, fierce, resolute, told him she wasn't one to crumble easily. "We can't hide," she said quietly. "Whoever's out there isn't going to stop." Michael nodded. "Then maybe it's time we stop waiting for them to come to us." 2 hours later, he stood in front of a gray office building on the edge of town, the kind that tried too hard to look respectable with its tinted windows and fake brick. The name on the frosted door read, Owen Price Construction. Owen Price was not what Michael expected. In his mid-50s, broad-shouldered, his once blonde hair cut short and slicked back, he had the confident swagger of a man who'd never been told no often enough. His tan was too even for the season, his watch too gold, his smile too practiced. When Michael entered, Owen leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers beneath a jaw dusted with silver stubble. "Well, if it isn't the new owner of my old headache," he said, voice smooth and mocking. "How's the lodge? Still standing, or did it sink into the lake yet?" Michael placed the leather notebook on the desk. "You know what this is?" Owen's grin thinned. "An old employee's doodles, maybe? Or the ramblings of a man who thought he was smarter than me?" "You paid him," Michael said evenly. "OP, that's you. And these red marks on the map? They match the coordinates for your illegal dam." Owen chuckled, leaning forward, elbows creaking the desk. "Mr. Harris, you sell houses. You don't solve crimes. You're a man who moves paper and shakes hands. And you think anyone's going to believe you over me?" Michael met his eyes. "I think truth has a way of surviving men like you." Owen's smile vanished. "You've been asking too many questions. Take the dog, take your charity case of a bookstore woman, and leave my name out of your bedtime stories." He waved him off like a fly, dismissive, dangerous in his calm. But Michael didn't move. "What happened to the man you blamed? The one who disappeared during the flood?" Owen's gaze sharpened, voice cooling. "Some ghosts deserve to stay buried." That night, the wind rose again, dragging the temperature down until even the walls of the lodge seemed to creak with cold. Michael stoked the fire, every sense on edge. Maggie sat reading near the hearth, though her eyes flicked off into the window. Ranger refused to settle, pacing restlessly. Then, a faint crunch outside, footsteps. The porch boards groaned. Before Michael could reach the door, it burst open. Two men pushed in, one broad and heavy, face half hidden under a hood, the other masked completely in black. Snow gusted in with them, mingling with the smoke from the hearth. Owen Price was unmistakable, his voice dripping contempt. "Told you to stay out of it, Harris." He nodded to the masked man. "Get the ledger." The intruder lunged toward the table, but before he could reach it, Ranger leapt, a flash of fur and fury, and clamped his jaws around the man's arm. A cry tore through the room as the man struggled, falling back against the wall. The glove on his right hand ripped loose, exposing a half-moon scar across his wrist. Maggie froze. "That scar," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Mark?" The masked man stopped fighting. Slowly, with a shaking hand, he pulled off the mask. Beneath it was a face hollowed by time, gaunt, unshaven, but unmistakable. Mark Brooks, her brother, his eyes, the same green as Maggie's, flickered with guilt and exhaustion. Owen swore under his breath, realizing the mistake. "You fool! You led them here!" Mark's voice cracked as he faced his sister. "Maggie, I didn't mean to. He forced me to come. He's burning everything. The records, the proof. I had to get the copy before it's gone." "Copy?" Michael demanded. Mark reached into his jacket and pulled out a small USB drive, its metal casing dented. "Everything's on here. Payments, permits, locations. He blamed me for the flood, said I sabotaged the dam, but it was him. He cut corners, took money, and people died." Owen snarled, pulling a gun from his coat. "You think anyone's going to see that?" Time slowed. Maggie gasped. Ranger growled, low and steady. Michael took a step forward, palms open. "You don't want to do this, Owen. You pull that trigger and you bury yourself." Owen sneered. "I've buried worse." But he didn't see the patch of ice forming on the threshold where the snow had melted earlier. As he stepped back, leveling the gun, his foot slipped. In that instant, Ranger lunged, teeth locking on his sleeve. Michael moved instinctively, grabbing Owen's wrist and twisting. The gun fired once into the ceiling, the echo splitting the night. Together, they crashed onto the porch. In the struggle, Michael seized a coil of rope hanging from the beam, old, used for firewood. He looped it around Owen's wrists, tightening until the man stilled, gasping. "You're under citizen's arrest," Michael said between breaths, "for murder and fraud." Owen laughed hoarsely. "You think they'll thank you for this? You've no idea who protects me." "Then maybe it's time someone stopped protecting you," Michael replied. When the sheriff's headlights finally cut through the trees half an hour later, the storm had quieted. Mark handed the USB to Michael, his face pale but unburdened. "I should have come back sooner," he said quietly. Maggie reached for his hand, eyes brimming. "You're here now. That's what matters." Ranger settled beside them, tail sweeping the floor once, as though agreeing. Outside, dawn crept over the frozen lake, turning the snow to gold. For the first time in years, the Harris Lodge felt like a home that could breathe again. By the time the snow melted from the pines and the lake began to mirror the blue of the sky again, everything in Lake Arrow seemed to breathe easier. The trial had come and gone in a blur of newspaper headlines and courthouse whispers. Owen Price, once the loudest man in every room, was now reduced to a photograph in the Colorado Tribune, his wrists cuffed, his smirk replaced by the hollow look of someone who had finally run out of lies. He had been convicted of corruption, falsifying permits, and illegal construction. For the first time in years, the lake was safe again. Mark Brooks stood beside Michael on the trail above the water, hammer in hand. He was leaner now, stronger, his sunburned skin darkened by weeks of work repairing the mountain paths. The guilt that had once weighed on his face had softened into something else, quiet purpose. He drove a nail into the wooden post and straightened the sign they'd just mounted. Flood risk zone, stay alert. Never thought I'd be putting up warnings for the same mess I helped make, he said with a rueful smile. His voice had gained steadiness, a little gravel but a lot of humility. Michael clapped him on the shoulder. A redemption's just another kind of rebuilding, Mark. One nail at a time. Down by the lodge, the place that had once felt like a tomb now hummed with new life. The porch was sanded smooth, windows fixed, and the scent of pine varnish hung in the air. The lakeside lodge, as the new sign read, was no longer a forgotten ruin. It had become something better. A community space where people came not to escape, but to reconnect. Maggie Brooks was the heart of it. She moved through the open kitchen in her usual calm rhythm, her auburn hair catching gold in the sunlight. At 58, her beauty wasn't the fragile kind. It was the kind carved by storms, resilient and graceful. She laughed easily now, a sound that made even the old floorboards seem to echo with warmth. "Lunch is ready if you two heroes ever decide to stop hammering things," she called from the doorway. Ranger trotted past her, tail wagging like a metronome. His coat gleamed now, healed of old scars, the fur rich black and tan. Around his neck hung a small silver tag, K947C, polished clean but still bearing the marks of history. Michael had finalized the adoption months earlier, signing papers with Dr. Evelyn Clark, who confirmed the microchip's data. "He's officially yours," she'd said. "Though, between you and me, it seems like he was yours all along." Ranger had since taken on a new duty. Not a soldier's mission, but a healer's. Michael and Maggie had started Silver Paws, a small therapy club held every weekend at the lodge. They invited veterans, widows, and elderly neighbors from town. Some came with old dogs. Others came simply to remember how it felt to hold something living and loyal again. There was Tom Weaver, a widowed war veteran with clouded eyes and a limp from an old shrapnel wound, who found peace brushing Ranger's coat. And Martha Lee, 70 and sharp-tongued, who taught everyone how to bake oatmeal cookies the right way, while insisting the dogs got the first batch. Laughter became the language of the place, the kind that eased old wounds better than words ever could. Michael watched it all unfold with a quiet pride he didn't quite recognize at first. He was still a realtor by trade, still helping families find homes, but now he approached his work differently. He chose carefully who he sold to. People who respected the land, who would plant gardens instead of fences. In the evenings, he offered free classes on mountain safety, teaching locals how to read the land, avoid landslides, and prepare for storms. "A house is only as strong as the hands that care for it," he'd tell them, and they'd listen. On a golden summer evening, as the lake turned copper under the setting sun, Michael stood on the porch watching the horizon. Maggie joined him, a cup of tea in her hands, her scarf fluttering in the soft wind. "It's funny," she said. "This place used to feel haunted. Now I can't imagine anywhere else feeling more alive." Michael smiled, his gaze on the calm water. "Maybe ghosts aren't always meant to scare us. Sometimes they just wait for us to forgive them." Ranger stretched out between them, head resting on Maggie's knee, eyes half closed in contentment. The sound of laughter drifted from inside, Mark and Tom arguing about fishing rods, Martha scolding them both. For the first time in years, the lodge felt like it belonged to everyone, a house full of second chances. Michael reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, a brass key, worn smooth at the edges, attached to a keychain shaped like a dog bone. He turned it in his palm before handing it to Maggie. "What's this?" she asked. smiling. "The master key," he said softly. "For every door here. Thought it's about time someone else shared the responsibility." She stared at it for a long moment, eyes glistening in the fading light. Then, instead of speaking, she reached out and took his hand. The silence between them wasn't awkward anymore. It was peace. Ranger gave a low, approving huff, his tail thumping once against the wood. Somewhere across the lake, a loon called, its song long and wistful, a reminder of things lost and found again. Michael looked at the horizon, where the last sliver of sun disappeared, and thought of how strange it was that healing didn't come with a bang or a miracle, but with small, steady acts of kindness, a repaired door, a shared meal, a second chance. And in that moment, surrounded by laughter, love, and the smell of pine, he finally understood. Every house he'd ever sold had just been practice for building this one. Sometimes God doesn't send miracles wrapped in lightning or thunder. Sometimes he sends them quietly, in the shape of a loyal dog, a stranger's kindness, or the courage to open an old door and start again. Michael thought he bought a cabin to be alone, but heaven had other plans. Through Ranger's eyes, he found faith again, not in grand sermons, but in small mercies, a warm fire, a kind smile, a second chance. If you've ever lost someone, if you've ever felt that life's winters would never end, remember, God is still writing your story. And sometimes, his greatest gifts walk toward us on 4 paws. May the Lord bless your heart today, heal what's heavy, and fill your home with love and light. If this story touched you, share it with someone who could use a reminder that grace still finds us, even in the quietest places. Tell us your own story in the comments below. Subscribe and join our family of hearts who believe in second chances, for people and for the animals who save them. God bless you all.